Okay, so welcome to our third show of Informal Conversations, hosted by myself, Dr. Mike Duncan, and Dr. Adam Ellwanger over on somewhere on some direction. Our special guest today is Regan Joswiak, who until recently was a master's student in the technical communication program at the University of Houston downtown, and is now the assistant director at the Writing Center at University of Houston Clear Lake, and was recently accepted to the PhD program at Texas Tech in technical communication. And we invited her as kind of a follow-up to our last show where we discussed the question of whether or not you should get a PhD in the humanities. And we thought we'd bring in Regan since she is about to embark on that journey. And our first question would be, given that you've learned of your acceptance roughly at the same time that we had a pandemic hit the United States, how has that affected your future planning?
Yeah, so for me, I feel like since Texas Tech's program is an online program and it was already designed to be that way, or at least the version of it that I'm entering into, that's helped in terms of my decision, because if I were to have gone to another program or accepted, another program, then I don't really know where I'd be kind of at right now with this, honestly, because, if it's a face-to-face situation and I'd have to be moving states and have to consider housing and apartments right now, and pretty much the whole situation, that would have really, really impacted it. But with my situation, it helped just because of this is already an online program. And so I would say for me that, right now my main concern is kind of like, okay, I need to get my classes lined up and I need to get in touch with the director, because everything has been so crazy for everyone that it's hard to really properly communicate, I think, with the students in the program, just because of a lot of things going on. And so in terms of my situation, it's kind of, for me, I just kind of lucked out with the program that I chose because of the situation.
So Texas Tech is pretty much a top tier school in technical communication, which is what you're pursuing. How many did you apply to? Just that one, or did you apply to various programs?
I applied to 7 different programs and I was accepted into all of them. But because, my thing is too, that since I am the assistant director of a writing center, I had just entered that position as I was applying for these different programs. And so at the time I wasn't exactly sure, or I should say rather, when I was looking at applying for these programs, I was actually applying to be interviewed for this position. And so I wasn't sure how things were even going to shake out with that. And so once I, took on this position though at Clear Lake and I started it, and I've really, just enjoyed it so much, then when I was considering the program, I was like, well, I could still maintain this position and still be working as an assistant director. But for Texas Tech, then it'd be doing it online every summer, go there for 2 weeks. And so it really works out well with what I'm wanting to do. But yeah, I did apply to, a bunch of different programs just to see, because they can be so competitive to get into.
For our audience and for any potential graduate students watching, let's clarify a few things. So Regan, you got your master's at our university, UH downtown, and that's a freestanding master's program. So we don't have a connection to a PhD with our program.
Right. Yeah.
Now, I think that it's fair to say, and Mike, I wonder if you think the same, that applying to 7 PhD programs and getting 7 acceptances is in itself an astounding achievement.
Yes. I don't know where you put it on your CV, but I don't think it would hurt.
But my point is that most people who apply to, say, between 10 to 12 PhD programs would not get accepted to anywhere near 100% of them. And so I think it's important that we note what it was that made Regan's application sort of uniquely attractive to do that. And as far as I could tell, it's kind of 3 things, and you two can disagree with me if you want, or elaborate. I think it's probably number 1, that you had already completed the master's degree, right?
Yes.
So you weren't coming in as a master's student in hopes that you could transition to the PhD. Number 2, you had a peer-reviewed publication, which you and Dr. Duncan co-authored, which
Yes.
for a
Yes.
graduate student is a really unusual achievement. And that's kind of, in many cases, that's the ticket to a tenure track position coming out of graduate school is, do you have a peer-reviewed publication under your belt? So that's number two. Number three, I think, was your at least pending position as an assistant director of a writing center, but at the very least you had a fair amount of writing center experience, right?
Exactly. Yeah, I'd already been in writing centers for a few years at that point because I became a peer tutor when I first started my program at University of Houston downtown. And so, since day one, I was already a tutor. And then like about 2 years later, then I became the interim coordinator of the writing center when our coordinator left that writing center. And so I already had quite a bit of writing center experience and some administrative experience too, because I held that position for a little over a year as interim. So I think that contributed quite a bit, the fact that I also, had that aspect as well with this.
So I just want to draw that out because in Mike's and my last episode, we were kind of like, PhD programs are really hard to get into. You might not even get in. And now
Yeah.
you're like, I applied to 7 and got into. It's important to say that, that you had a really unique application package that facilitated that. So those are some ways, if you're watching and wondering, how can I make myself a more attractive candidate for PhD programs? Getting that writing center experience. And I had that too, coming into my PhD program. I did not have the peer-reviewed publication. Like the peer-reviewed publication is basically a slam dunk. If you've got one of those at the master's level, then you're going to get doctoral acceptances.
And obviously the standards have changed over the years. 50 years ago, that would have been even more extraordinary than it is now. But I suspect there are other candidates equally qualified as Regan who are in competition.
Probably.
Yeah, that's true. I feel like there had to have been, but like you were just saying though, Adam, that it helps to have a combination of those things, because some people may have like one or the other, and they may not necessarily have all of those things. And actually, like as I was going through the process of applying, I was looking at the Grad Cafe forums. I don't know if you guys have looked at those at all before.
No.
So just for the audience as well, Grad Cafe.
So tell us what those are real quick.
Yeah. So Grad Cafe is a forum that you can go to, and there's different disciplines. So you can look at like rhetoric and literature, whatever your specialization is you want to look at. And basically you have students who are looking to apply to like PhD or grad school. It may not even be a PhD, maybe, a master's program or something like that. And they are all communicating with each other and sharing information in terms of their application process, kind of where they're at or what they've been doing. Some may ask for feedback from others about their personal statements and things of that nature. And so I was getting on there quite a bit just to kind of see the discussions and the conversations that are happening about applying for doctoral programs, especially because like they have the rhetoric and composition designation, which was some of the programs that I was applying to. And so when I was looking at that, I kept seeing from previous conversations so many people that were saying, I've applied to like 10 or 15 programs, didn't get into any of them. But a lot of those people that were applying, when they're describing their experiences, they didn't have the master's yet, or they didn't have a publication, or they may not have had tutoring experience or teaching experience or things like that, to where I feel like a lot of what was happening with that is because of those missing pieces from what I was seeing.
Yep.
It's interesting.
Go ahead, Mike.
When you come out of a master's program with a publication, you're so far ahead of the curve in terms of where you should be. It's almost to the point, I wonder if this is going to continue to accelerate. In order to get into a master's program, you'll have to have published while you're an undergraduate.
Yes, yeah.
Because that's when we wrote that article, Jared, you were doing the work of an assistant professor. So you are 2 levels ahead of where you should be in terms of productivity.
So let me ask this. Traditionally, a doctoral student would support themselves through basically the fact that their tuition is abated, and usually they'll have an assistantship of one sort or another.
Mhm.
It sounds like with an online program that probably, I mean, maybe you're going to do some online teaching for them, I guess. I don't.
So that's the one thing with an online program like this is there's really not assistantship opportunities, because I was wondering that too when I was initially looking at the program is teaching online courses, is that an option? And they don't have that currently as an option for this. So basically you have, maybe a couple scholarship options, and then other than that, you have to pay for it. And
So let me ask you this then. So at the stage you said when you were getting, when you were applying and stuff like that, you didn't yet know whether or not your assistant director gig at the Writing Center at Clear Lake was going to be yours. So that's, I assume, how you're going to support yourself now. But my question would be, had that not happened, would you have attempted to go to a face-to-face program as assistantships and stuff?
Yeah, so had that not happened, honestly, I'm not even quite sure what my selection would have been at that point. Because I feel like if I didn't get that, then yeah, I could be looking at moving and doing an assistantship or something like that, because ultimately I need to be able to pay for that. And with this position right now, I'm able to do that. And then also with Clear Lake, they are able to, if it's, approved, you're able to submit like a request to them explaining, that I'm going to be taking some coursework, and then they will actually pay for some of the coursework. And so that also helps in that Clear Lake will actually, be willing to supply some funding for that. And then also there's my salary. And so that helps. But unless you have something like that, then yeah, I probably would have taken an assistantship, honestly, because otherwise I don't know how I would have afforded that.
Well, by applying to a lot of places, you gave yourself those options.
Yes. Yeah. And that was actually part of my struggle looking at some of this, because as I was getting the acceptances back and, these programs were communicating with me saying, oh, you got this assistantship, or we're providing this level of funding. I was looking at that going, it's like some of them are going to like fully fund that, they're going to like give me the full ride and provide all of these things. And so I was really trying to weigh that out. But looking at it, I was like, well, the stipends they provide, still can be generally between like 15 to 17,000 from what I was seeing in that. And then they pay for the coursework, but then it also depended on the program in terms of how many courses you'd be teaching for them as like a TA or, the position you would have. And so when I was looking at all this, I was like, you know what, like I just got this assistant director position, and I really want to stay in it. And so for me, it's like, I wanted to hold that. And then with my salary and then, the funding at Clear Lake, I was like, I think that I can pull that off. But yeah, that's definitely something to think about with online programs, is there's generally not much funding for them.
Mm-hmm. And you said you applied to 7.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how many PhD programs did you apply to? Do you remember?
I applied to the one across the street from my apartment. I got in, obviously.
I applied to 3, and I got into 2, and I won't explain how, but in one of the acceptances, I had some strings pulled for me. And so that probably doesn't really fully count as an acceptance. But yeah, I would think I applied to too few, I think. And Mike, I think you probably applied to too few also.
It would have been possible for me to go anywhere else.
Well, that's really the deciding factor.
For various personal reasons, it worked out.
I'm just saying that for the typical person who wants to pursue a doctorate,
yes,
who doesn't have Regan's CV, you should probably apply to, I think, 10 or 12 different programs?
Yeah, I would agree with that based on what I've been seeing, is that, they've really become such a level like competition that I feel like that would be the best thing to do. Because honestly, with me, when I was looking at that, I was like, nah, maybe I'll apply to, like 3 to 5. And then I got paranoid because I was going to Grad Cafe and I was seeing I applied to 15, I didn't get into anything. And I was like, I mean, I know I have more experience than these people, but really, can I bet on that? Because I don't know at this point. And so I was like, no, I'm gonna apply to the 7 that I like and see how it shakes out. And so I really feel like at least 10, yeah.
I have good friends who I think were well qualified, who were like, I applied to 10, didn't get into any. And, it's just because, the seats are limited, and they should be even more limited than they are, given the amount of opportunities that exist after the degree, as we discussed last week. But it is what it is.
Yeah, and I feel like, for some students as well, that they may actually have some really good experience, but then there's the struggle of actually demonstrating that in a personal statement too, and actually being able to showcase your experience. And so I feel like that can also factor into it as well throughout the application process.
That's something that might be worth a whole other episode of Informal Conversations, is what makes a good personal statement.
Yes.
But I really think that also, if you're watching and you're considering applying, don't underestimate the personal statement. It is not a kind of formality where you just scribble some stuff down. It's actually got a very particular form. It's a very particular genre. It has very particular moves.
And it's especially important if you're going to apply to a program that is based on writing.
Yeah, really.
Yes. Yeah, especially, yeah.
When we look at graduate applications at UHD, we're very interested in how well the applicants can write.
And it's not really a breezy genre either. I read personal statements where it's like, I never thought I'd find myself here. Like that's not really the typical way of inhabiting the form. So there's
Actually, I think it is typical. I read a lot of those.
Yeah, I do too.
Maybe it's not ideal, but it is typical.
Not the typical way successful candidates.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's a serious form, right? And it's not sort of a narration of your hopes and dreams. It's a very specific, here's what I've done, here's what my qualifications are, here's why I'm interested in you, here's why you should be interested in me. That's one variety. There's a couple other varieties, sadly. One of the varieties is, these are all the barriers I've had to face in my life due to the systemic structures that held me back, but I've overcome them, and now I'm going to overcome this one. That's another form of them, and, tragically, I think that's often successful too. But, it shouldn't be a meandering sort of thing. No,
it needs to be really focused. And I think that sometimes it can be underestimated because it's a short document. And so people think, oh, I'm just gonna be talking about myself for, a couple pages. That's not so bad. And it's like, no, that's exactly what makes it difficult to write, is you only have those 1 page, 2 pages to get into everything, depending on the program. So yeah.
It's gotta be a tight 750 words.
Yes. Yeah.
Well honed.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like it needs to get into exactly what it needs to, and there shouldn't be any extra where you're like, no, I don't really need that. No, then get rid of it. It needs to be really focused and show any research experience or, administrative experience or teaching experience or, whatever it is, it needs to be really focused.
And there's a prequel for your eventual application letter after you finish.
Yes.
Those are a bit longer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's 1,000 and million personal statements online, though, and I think that anybody who's considering writing one for a doctoral program would do well to seek out personal statements in the discipline that they're seeking a degree in, because they do vary from discipline to discipline. And maybe read 10 or 20 of different ones you find online for that degree. But don't go into it blind.
Yeah, exactly. With me, it's I wanted to kind of prepare myself as much as possible and be trying to see, okay, how did other people handle this, or how is it handled, in the discipline, or, getting advice. And so talking to professors, because that's what I did too, I talked to Mike a lot during the process. I talked to Dr. Maviva at University of Houston downtown. I talked to Dr. Boca. I talked to multiple people throughout the process in terms of what should I expect and, what to know when I'm applying. So that really helps a lot too.
Let's skip ahead in the timeline a bit. So you're finishing your dissertation, you're ready to defend, or you have just defended your ABD, as they say, all but dissertation. What are the plans? What's your strategy?
Well, for me right now, just because I have been in Writing Center so long, I consider that my home, and one of the things about the field is that generally, if you want to progress in it as an administrator, then it gets to the point to where if you want to become a director, depending on the institution you're at and what the responsibilities are, then you have to have a PhD and they expect you to have it. And so for me, I really just want to, be able to have that credential so I could say, okay, I can advance, I can grow, I can do research because, obviously I can do research right now, but when you have a PhD and you go through that process, it helps build that skill even more. Because, with writing centers, I really feel like they're a prime area for research. Like you come across ideas all the time in terms of something that would be a good study. And so I feel like for me, I'd be staying within my field and then just being able to progress in terms of, research opportunities, advancing as an administrator is what I'm really interested in.
So it's possible that on the other end, you sort of maintain your position at Clear Lake, but let's say that that didn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
Would there be any geographical limitations on what types of jobs you'd be willing to take? I mean, would you just be looking in Houston or just in Texas? Or?
Honestly, I've always felt like this, even when I was originally looking at applying for programs, is that, I don't feel like I'm limited to Texas or Houston. I'd be willing to go outside of that. Now I do have my boyfriend to factor into this as well. And so it's kind of like, we'd have to figure out, where he'd be interested in being, too, in this process. But when we've talked about it before, when I was applying to programs, and the idea was, neither of us feel like we're tied to this area, that, we could expand beyond that. And I honestly feel like if you're looking for work in academia, you almost have to. You have to be able to expand beyond that just because of how rigorous searches are now.
Yeah, that is the general exception, the expectation that you should be willing to go anywhere.
Yeah.
My wife and I took California and New York off the table, but other than that.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, like, I love New York, but just the cost of living. Same thing with California. That's why I'm like, I don't think I could do that in terms of living there. But yeah, any place that I could see myself being in, or that isn't just an extraordinary cost of living, I'd be willing to do.
Are you from Houston?
Yeah. So I actually spent most of my life in Brenham, but I was originally born in Houston. And then, I lived there for a long time and then went to Huntsville and then came back to Houston. So in a way, yes. Yeah.
I'm from Western New York. I grew up in Western New York and
then
really? Moved to South Carolina for undergrad. And it was not, if somebody would have told me prior to being 28 years old, hey, you'd be living in Texas, I would have said, nah.
I think there's no way, yeah.
But here I am.
Was that a pretty sharp shift when you came here to where you're like, oh, wow? Or what was your experience when you came here?
I really like Houston. I despise the heat.
Yes.
I am a bad sweater. And so this is the time of year I'll basically be wet from now until December. But other than that, Houston, I like it a lot. It's a cool.
Well, there's a lot of swamps in South Carolina.
South Carolina, I thought before I moved here, I was like, oh, South Carolina's hot, Texas is hot. What's the difference?
Right.
Nope.
No, completely different. Yep.
And Western New York, up in Rochester, I'm going up there in a couple of weeks, and I talked to some friends. I was like, hey, what's the temp up there today? This was like 5 days ago. They're like 55.
Oh my God.
I miss it.
Yes. Yeah. It's like, actually it was a few summers ago, I went to Maine, and I just remember just night and day, I'd be talking to my friends in Houston and they'd be telling me what terrible weather they're having. I'm like, well, I'm in Maine right now. Everything's fine here. It's great. So yeah.
When I went on the job market, there was a job in rhetoric at at a university in my hometown. And I thought that the fact that I was from there would be a big selling point.
Mm-hmm.
And I managed to get an interview, but then heard nothing, which was at that time a disappointment for me.
And that's the thing, you just never know what to expect sometimes.
Right.
You can go in thinking like, okay, this is going to be great. And then it's like, well, what?
There's so many variables in the hiring process that it's just almost completely unpredictable what will happen.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, this is a weird story, though. It is unpredictable, but there's also weird ways things turn out. Because when I looked at the job list that came out to say, here's the positions that are open that year, my brother-in-law lived in Houston, And he looked at the list. He was like, "Oh, University of Houston downtown. Like, wouldn't it be awesome if you get that one?" And I was like, "Rob, that's just not the way this works. Like, you don't just and that's where you end up. It's not how it works." And then
Right, yeah.
old, you know.
It's not the way it works.
You need to get your
until
brother
it
on the
is.
show. He understands the process at a very deep level.
Right, yeah. He could have some very deep insights for everyone, I think.
Yeah. There's actually another story that went on that time. Adam and I went up for the same job. I don't know who was hired first.
Oh, wow.
No, Adam got the offer. So they made a huge error there. Where was that, Adam?
That was Augusta State. In
Augusta
Georgia.
State.
Augusta State.
And I have to say, not that anybody at Augusta State is watching this, but you know, that was a very nice place. I thought that the faculty were very nice to me. But one of the issues was for me with that job was that what they were looking for was someone to come in and direct their freshman composition program. And
it's not an uncommon ask for a rec comp hire. In fact, I'd say half or more of the positions are,
right.
Please direct our program for us.
And for me, that was unattractive for a couple reasons. One is that I considered myself more of a rhetorician than a composition studies person, and still do. Two was that, and I think that, I'm trying to think how to put this delicately, and I think Mike would agree that it seemed like—
I can put it indelicately if you'd like.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah.
Well, I don't want to put it indelicately. I want to put it delicately. But it seemed to me like within the existing faculty, there were different visions for what the freshman composition program there should look like. And I was concerned about entering a job right out of grad school and having to make someone unhappy. And that combined with two other factors for me was, number one was the pay was lower than I wanted. And to that faculty's credit, right, they called me up after I asked, well, you got to give me more money. And they called me up and said, we can't give you more money, but we will come up and help you move down here. And I thought, you know, that's cool. Like that, and there's not a lot of people who would be willing to do that. I'm barely willing to help a family member move.
Right, yeah. Anything involving moving is like, no, it's a nightmare.
But the other thing was just like, since I had Houston on the table, you know, Augusta, Georgia, Houston, and I'm not a golfer, so that was an easy choice. Mike, you got that offer after I declined, right?
No.
No?
I had a lot of interviews, but I had one offer.
Okay. Yeah, I had a lot of interviews, 4 campus visits, and 3 offers. Yeah, but that was also, I don't know. I think I do very well in interviews. You know, and I think, and Mike, maybe I don't mean for you to take offense at this, but you can be a very cagey guy. In settings.
We've had this discussion before.
Yes. In settings where you don't know the people you're talking to, you could be very cagey and I'm kind of the opposite of that. I just am telling you.
Well, I would interview very differently now than I did 11 years ago.
That's probably true. And I think one thing that delightfully loosened you up, Mike, was getting tenure.
There were a couple other things that happened, but yeah. Kids.
Yeah.
Mostly.
But I mean, yeah, I connect with that as well, because I feel like in terms of interview settings or first impressions, for me, it's like it's a struggle. So the fact that you can do well during interviews, that's a great, trait to have, I think.
It's actually a handicap in the rest of my life, because where it comes from is I'm willing to say anything to anyone. And I think in an interview that could be an asset, but in daily life, it can be a real liability.
Yeah.
So tell me more about these 2 weeks that happen in the summer. What is the function of those 2 weeks at Texas Tech?
Yeah, so the function of the 2 weeks is really to get you on campus to where you can interact with the students and the faculty there, because it's designed almost what I envision to be kind of like a workshop sort of thing, to where you have students who are you know, holding presentations throughout the time that you can go to, and they have like all these events scheduled for you to attend. And so the idea is that you'll be able to, you know, connect more with what's going on campus, you learn from the other students. And then also some of that time there, it counts towards a course in some way, from my understanding, the way they explained it. And so you're knocking out like part of a course. It's almost treated like a lab from what they were saying. And so it's expected that you do that every summer. It's mandatory that you go there so that, you know, you can participate in these activities and it can count towards your coursework.
Is it like an intensive 8 hours a day kind of thing?
I'm honestly not quite sure what it looks like because I haven't gotten that information yet, but I kind of view it to be more intensive because the way they described it sound pretty intensive to me. But I do like the fact that they have that in there, just because with me, I was hesitant to accept being in an online program just because I feel like I need that face-to-face interaction. But with Texas Tech's program, it's different too than the online courses I've been in, just because it's synchronous. And so they hold it at an exact time and then you participate synchronously. But then I think also just, you know, being able to be there every summer and actually be on campus, I think that helps quite a bit too.
So you're going to do that this summer also?
So I don't know what that's going to look like. Well, actually, like this upcoming summer, I'm not doing that because like, when you first get into the program, it's like the following summer they have you you actually start. So luckily it wouldn't be to where I'm just entering this and all of a sudden I have to go. So it would be like the following summer, to my understanding, yeah, that I'd be doing.
Do you have like an orientation or something this summer?
So I participated already in this next steps sort of thing that they had that was a Zoom meeting. And then to my understanding, you know, it's up to the departments to do their own orientations. And so I haven't heard more information from mine. So I'm getting the point where I'm just going to, you know, reach out to the director and see what do I need to do, because I haven't heard further communication on that. But I would imagine they would have, you know, an orientation of some kind for that. Yeah.
I remember being very intimidated at my PhD orientation.
By what?
By what?
They put a gun to your head?
Huh?
Yeah, you're going to get this degree or you're going to eat this bullet? What?
Yeah.
I was intimidated by the other people who had been admitted, who seemed to know a lot more about what they were doing than I did, frankly. And I was intimidated by the fact that they seemed to know more about like the program and stuff like that. And
Imposter syndrome. Yeah, that's. I feel like that a lot too. So I imagine, you know, it could be a similar thing for me, because it seems that any time that I have started, you know, my coursework, whether it was like my bachelor's or master's, and there's other people in the room where I'm like, how did I get here? How am I here? So I feel like that's a kind of a common thing.
It is, but that feeling can be great motivator too. Because I remember like coming away from that thinking, oh man, I'm going to have to outwork everybody if I'm even going to be able to compete here. And that
exactly. And you know,
there was a competitive atmosphere to grad school. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and well, for me, I think it's kind of all the more because I'm a first generation student, and so because of that, even just the aspect of going to college originally, I was intimidated by, because there was like so much in the process I didn't know, since my parents didn't have degrees or anything. And so I think since day one of my academic career, I've been like, okay, I have to really, you know, work hard at this because there's so many other people that are more prepared than I am. So yeah, I feel like that's contributed to feeling like that for me.
Regan, as you described Texas Tech program, I wonder, I think Adam and I had a very different graduate school experience than what you're going to have. I took one online course the whole time I was there. I practically lived in the English building 8 hours a day. I had a little office and I was in there. I was in there all the time other than when I was teaching or in the library. I was surrounded by graduate students constantly, which I was socializing with. I ended up marrying one of them. Mm-hmm. I turned in all my papers on paper.
Wow.
And online stuff was almost, other than that one course, which I didn't enjoy, was almost unheard of. Most of my professors, I'd say half of my professors were not very comfortable with email.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just, it felt like I was caught between, 1960 and 2008 when I started, roughly. Or sorry, 2005.
Mm-hmm.
Adam, I don't know if you felt the same way. I felt like I was caught between one era and the other.
I didn't have time to think about how things should be. Like, that was one thing that I would credit with whatever success I had as a doctoral student is I had an assistantship, obviously. So I was making, $15,000 a year from teaching some courses. And I was also taking some student loans because $50,000 a year wasn't quite enough at that time.
Yeah.
But I noticed that a lot of my fellow students, once class, like the classes they teach were over at 11 and office hours were done by 1 o'clock or whatever, if they didn't have a class meeting that they had to go to that night, they would cut out and go to the bars or do whatever, starting at 3. And I just decided really early on, and this is not to say that I don't like to party because I spent a great deal of time doing that, but I just decided that Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, I'm doing something related to school. And even if I don't have homework, even if I'm caught up on classes and grading, well, then I'm going to be reading something that's relevant to the stuff I'm studying. And I held to that pretty strictly, as a graduate student. And I think that served me really well in the end.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like, and everybody's different with this, but with me too, I feel like I need that kind of structure in place to where it's like, okay, I'm going to be spending this time doing this thing. And then after these hours, okay, I can do something else. I feel like I have to have that, especially when you're in, a graduate program. It helps to have that kind of structure.
Mm-hmm. And one of my mentors, used to be a big advocate of he used to say, you get out a couple pieces of paper. One piece of paper you plan out this week. The other piece of paper you plan out this month. The other piece of paper you plan out this semester. And I can't say I ever adopted that, but I do still to this day at the beginning of the week. The first task of the week is a sheet that says what needs to get done this week and when am I going to do it?
It's a job.
Mm-hmm.
It should be approached as a job.
Yeah,
otherwise
exactly.
you will not finish.
Yep.
You can't half-ass graduate school.
No.
Certainly not the PhD. Because I half-assed the master's.
But there becomes a limit to BSing the situation. Yeah. But yeah, with me, it's a similar process that, I'd have to have like a physical planner, and I would sit down and I would do exactly what you described, where it's like, okay, I'm going to plan out, or if I have this big paper, okay, I'm going to do 2 pages this day or 2 pages this day. And, I would have to like meticulously plan everything. And part of that though, is because like another job that I've had, like in the corporate environment as an administrator, is they had everyone have their own planners. They provided that, and they would have these like hourly deadlines. And so you had to like really use that planner and really, actually use it as a tool to benefit yourself. And so especially after that experience, like right before grad school, I was like, nope, like this is what I'm doing. I'm making sure to use that. And so
that's a valuable skill that I think a lot of graduate students never develop. Is time management.
I agree based on what I've seen. I think that it can be a really challenging thing, just because, especially when you are in grad school, a lot of times you're just juggling so many different things. A lot of grad students can have full-time jobs, or they'll have families, and it can be really hard to juggle a lot of those different things at once, I think.
Yeah, it can.
One thing I'm wondering about, actually, throughout everything going on right now with COVID-19, I kind of want to see what you guys thought about this, is in terms of like what you guys think will happen with coursework and how it may change and evolve. Because like you guys were explaining your experience before with, not having as much online coursework. And then when I was applying for programs, it's hard to find entirely like online programs like what Texas Tech has, at least in the discipline I'm interested in. So I've been wondering throughout this whole process, like, okay, are we going to see more online programs, because everybody has to be online right now?
Yes.
I'm kind of curious. Yeah.
I think we will, but not because of any other reason than that it's cheaper, right?
Right.
It's the administrative costs are less, and I think that the universities are going to be totally freaked out with the economic implications of this. And I'll say this: we've had it coming for a long time.
Yeah.
So it's well deserved, the bind we find ourselves.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly.
Adam will not be happy until the campus is on fire.
Yeah.
It already is. That's
And
I was gonna say,
passes-
isn't it?
It
He's
already
praised and say, I finally destroyed academia.
We need to understand really where we are. The campus is already on fire, but we can't rebuild anything until it's burnt down to the ground, right? And so it's
it's a service to everyone.
Desire. Destroy the world and rebuild it. Worse than before.
in my things are going to change for sure.
Yeah.
So, what do you think the job market's going to look like by the time you graduate, Regan?
By the time I graduate, probably not good, is what I'm going to say. Because I feel like there's increasingly more and more competition, and the market's already getting flooded, honestly, with a lot of people who do have master's degrees or doctoral degrees. I think it's just only going to continue in the market. I think it's going to be even more challenging based on what I've been seeing, but I'm not even sure myself, because that's going to be years down the road.
Well, that's one of the problems with the proliferation of online programs, right? Is that I think that as there become more and more of them, eventually that's going to level the academic labor market.
Right.
And once it does, jobs like the ones that Mike and I have at kind of middle tier or lower tier universities will dry up even further, right? Because why pay somebody $10,000 to teach an online class when we can just have a horde of adjuncts who will do it for $3,000 per course?
Yeah.
And so I really think that online, like pushing more and more stuff online, is exactly the wrong way to respond to this crisis. But I do believe that is how we'll respond to it.
That's what I'm thinking too.
Well, as long as, Southern New Hampshire and Liberty and all those sort of six-figure enrollment colleges can thrive and charge ridiculous amounts of money, I think we're still competitive. Because we have state money, and we also have still comparatively much lower tuition.
Well, the question, though, is that once universities at the top tier, right, can offer everything online, right, they're going to have to lower their costs, right, overall, because you don't have the expense of campus maintenance.
Yeah.
Of overhead. So once the price of a tier 1 degree drops, can a university in the middle or on the low end even compete with that if they're not cheaper, right? And
right.
I don't think they can.
I don't feel like they could either, honestly.
So maybe we will just burn down the main building.
Yeah.
It's old, expensive. Oh well.
To be clear, right? I'm not trying to be a deconstructionist, right? What I'm trying to do is be a constructionist, right? I want things to go down so we can build something new. I don't think that will happen. I think instead we'll spend trillions of dollars to bail out the existing status quo. But hey, a guy can dream.
Yeah. Positive destruction.
The theme here seems to be that the world will be a little different, or maybe quite a bit different by the time you earn your PhD.
Yeah.
Here's a question. One of the things that always puzzled me when I went on the market was the amount of people who went out, who basically started applying for jobs before they'd finished their dissertation, before they defended. That didn't make any sense to me. I don't think My defense was scheduled when I started sending applications, but I had finished writing months before.
Mm-hmm.
And the result was already a foregone conclusion. So before I had a single phone interview, I had already defended. And that was not common 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Most applicants seem to go on before they've finished 2 chapters. Adam, what did you do?
I had almost, well, okay. So when I had like a chapter or 2 written, I did go up for one job just to test the waters and to refine my skills and stuff like that. That was at a Christian university in South Carolina. They were really thrilled about me and wanted to offer me the job. And then they were like, okay, you have to have an interview with the provost. Beware, it's going to be about Christian concerns and not scholarly concerns. And I said, whatever, right? The first question in...
Did you bring a Bible with you?
Well, no, I didn't. But the first...
That was the mistake.
The first question in that interview was, how do you know you're going to go to heaven? Right? And being a relatively philosophical guy, my answer was, well, I don't.
Yeah.
That sent the conversation off in a poor direction. So a few days later, I got a letter from the chair of the department that said that the provost had decided I was a poor spiritual fit, that's a quote, for the university. And I told that to one of my advisors, and he looked at me and he said, well, they're right. But so that was just kind of a practice job. Then the year that I went on the market at the same time you did, Mike, I had the whole thing written, but I hadn't defended. And that's an important thing to remember. Like, I brought the whole thing with me, like to MLA, so that in face-to-face interviews, I could be like, it's done.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Right?
And
like,
you weren't waving a stick. You were waving you had a stack.
Right. I was waving a stack, right? But what my concern was that, like, obviously the next question for everybody who hasn't defended yet is, how close are you to completing your dissertation? And everybody's answer, of course, is very close, right? And I wanted to prove that I meant it.
Right.
So I think I got the job offer at UHD in February, and I had defended by early April.
Well, it's part of the long-term strategy. You have the market always opens up in September, October. That may change. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But that's when the ads start going out, and the earliest deadlines would be like what, October 1st, October 15th, something like that. So if you were planning on graduating, say in May, you're far away from defending. But if you decide to defend in a fall, well, then you'll end up in your first interviews with your dissertation and defense done. There's kind of a strategy there.
I would ask Mike, what do you think? Like, my advice to anybody who's finishing up the PhD would be, sure, you can go on the market before the dissertation's done, but don't do it unless you're really going to finish the semester you're on the market. If you're positive that's going to happen, then do it, right? But if this might drag out for another full year, don't.
Yeah, if you don't know what the thesis of your dissertation is yet,
don't do it. Yeah.
I've seen that happen. You shouldn't be going on the market unless your dissertation is done up here.
I've seen people defend dissertations and they're not sure of the thesis.
Well, that's a completely separate problem.
I've seen people scrap the thesis, like, nope, I'm starting over on like the whole thing. I've seen that too.
Yeah, and they're one of the and I don't think this will happen to you, Regan, but it does bear mentioning, is that not all people who start PhD programs finish. Sometimes it's financial. Sometimes it's, stuff happens. But there's also the part where there's burnout.
Right.
There were several students at my doctoral program who were at the same stage of the process when I entered the program as when I graduated.
Wow.
And I don't think that was necessarily anything to do with intellectual ability,
Mm-hmm.
but there was some burnout going on. There was confidence,
Motivation is a big
motivation, kind of running in place kind of things going on, and also possibly poor positioning within the field of choice. TechCom, I think, is still a young field, so it doesn't have some of the problems that other subfields in English have.
Right.
There's still a lot of unexplored areas. If you're in a subfield that was kind of played out in 1900, you're kind of there's not as much opportunities to position yourself in the scholarship,
Right.
which is probably the hardest single task you have to do.
So are you saying it's not a bear market for aspiring Shakespeare scholars?
No. No, it is not. Which is to say, yes, that is exactly what and also then demand for those positions is also way down.
So if somebody watching wants to go get a PhD in Shakespeare, would you tell them don't do it?
I tell them to rethink their life.
Yeah. Just a slight consideration of
There
everything
are
you've been
already
doing.
so many on the market
looking
for jobs. You have to go up against them, and they have all the advantages of time and experience. So unless you have the world's single most brilliant idea about Shakespeare that has never been explored before, pick something else.
Yeah.
There's lots of other work to do.
Shakespeare was really Pat Sajak. That's my thesis. You guys have read all that Bacon stuff, right? Never mind.
Shakespeare's Bacon?
Bacon stuff? I just heard bacon and nothing else.
You know those theories that...
My mind also goes blank when I hear the word bacon.
Yeah. It's like...
No brain power is required after that word.
That Francis Bacon was Shakespeare. You're familiar with those theories?
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking
Those
about.
were also played out.
That's my point.
Early, yeah.
So I would go a step further than the Shakespeare thing, and I would say if you love an author, right? If you love Virginia Woolf, if you love Hunter S. Thompson, if you love Kurt Vonnegut, if you love Mallory, right? Then if you have one author you want to work on, you probably shouldn't do a PhD, right? Because I think that the days of just like, oh, well, we need a scholar on Vanity Fair, right? Like those are long gone, right? I think
there's still opportunities for that research, but I think we're going to see more and more generalists.
Yeah.
And those are going to be more and more employable. If you can speak to 3 or 4 different fields, you're not only more employable, but you'll have the opportunity once you're hired to further branch out and specialize. So if you do want to write that piece about Hunter Thompson, you can after you've done something else.
Right.
Right now, Adam and I have the freedom to write about whatever the hell we want. Like for this morning while I was flipping through Wikipedia, I was like, I want to write a book about the rhetorical techniques of 19th century circuit writers. That would not have gotten me hired, okay?
They would look at it and go, what is this?
Maybe it would have, but I mean,
I think I settled on
not.
what my next book is about yesterday. I think I figured out what I'm going to write about, and it's happiness, right? And I think that, that's the kind of work that is left to be done. It's not like, oh, let me write the 700th book on Edgar Allan Poe, right? Like more like conceptual work. I think that there's there's a much richer market in people doing conceptual work than, say, literary historical work or sort of traditional literary hermeneutic work.
There will always be a place for that, though.
Yeah, there will.
It's just harder to make money doing it.
Yeah.
It's like it's harder to make money writing fiction than it was 100 years ago. So you have to be able to feed yourself. And I think, Regan, you have struck a balance between further education and income.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
You may have to make an adjustment later on.
Yeah.
I think all of us are going to have to make some sort of adjustment.
Exactly, yeah.
We're pushing an hour here. I think maybe we should cut it.
Regan, you've done very well for yourself. Congratulations. I'm sure you'll have a great time in your doctoral program. And
Thank you.
don't forget us at UHD.
Oh, I won't, as I watch it burn down to the ground.
On that note, that concludes show number 3. Hopefully there will be a show number 4.
Yeah.
As Adam burns down my house.
Right?
Burning
Make
it.
sure all the
His skill
survivors
as an
are accounted
arsonist.
for.
You guys need to start being nicer to me. I'm the reason people who watch the show watch it.
I'm praising your arsonist skills. What are you not?
Considering our audience is, what, 5 people?
Yeah.
Right.
I don't think you're that valuable, Adam. I think you can be replaced.
That's it. I've had it.
All right.
All right.
Thanks,
Bye.
Ray.
Thanks. Yeah. Thanks for inviting me.